Hello, this is Sarah Noel Block, the host of the Tiny Marketing Show. Today, I'm sharing an interview that I had with Michele Linn, the founder of Mantis Research, and we're going to talk all about how to use original research to amp up your content marketing. Now, let's talk about where you're at today with content marketing. You might be regurgitating what everybody else is saying and passing it off as thought leadership. But the only true thought leadership comes from original research. And that's what we'll be talking about today. When you use original research to drive your content marketing, you get more PR power, more media mentions, and endless ways to repurpose, which is what I do. And Michele Linn is amazing at creating survey-based research and driving your reports so you can really create original content marketing that gets you noticed in your industry. And really, it does move you from, saying what everyone else is saying and becoming a true thought leader. So stay tuned for that interview. Hello and welcome to Tiny Marketing. I'm Sarah Noel Block and I teach small marketing departments that are tired of feeling overwhelmed and under-resourced how to build and manage effective and efficient marketing strategies that work for them. Get ready, it's time to dig in and get a big impact with your tiny team. Everybody has this goal of thought leadership and creating content that no one else is talking about, creating content that really stirs the industry and gets people talking. But there's only one way to really do that, and that's through original content. I'm your host, Sarah Noel Block, and this is the Tiny Marketing Show. I recently interviewed Michele Linn with Mantis Research, and we talked all about how to apply original research into your content marketing. She is a genius when it comes to survey-based original research. And from building out the questions to finding the audience, to finding the story within your audience's answers, she walks us through how to do that so you can create true thought leadership. Not that fake kind, true thought leadership. So stay tuned. She'll be right here. Thank you so much for joining me, Michele. Can you introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. My name is Michele Linn, and I work with Mantis Research. We help marketers conduct and publish survey-based research that they use within their content marketing efforts.
Yes, I started following you on LinkedIn and just fell in love with your content. I'm obsessed with. I definitely have, how you can do the little bell now. I have you belled so I can get a notification when you post. You've taught me a lot about how original content impacts content marketing, or original research impacts content marketing. And it's not like any other type of content marketing. There's no fluff about it. You're getting something that will have real legs that you can get PR around. It'll flow into all other aspects of marketing. Well, first, let's start off with having you help me make my happy playlist. So what is your happy song?
Yeah, you know what? I have a lot of happy songs, but one I really love, it's an oldie, but Viva La Vida from Coldplay.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one.
And it's one of those things that I have this video of my kids several summers ago, and they're just doing this really sweet, innocent dance to it with their friends. And it was it reminds me of like innocence and summer, and it just brings you back to a very happy place.
I love that. That gave me goosebumps. It's going on the playlist. Okay, let's get into original research. So tell me the impact that it has on content marketing and why you focused your career on original research.
Yeah, so I've been in the content marketing space for many years, since about 2008, 2009. And one of the things I've noticed is that a lot of content marketing does really, really well, or it can do really well. But because all of the content out there and the spaces are getting so very noisy, what I found is that original research is just a very unique and meaningful and worthwhile way to actually say something new. So because by its very nature, you're collecting new data, you're answering those unanswered questions, and it's data driven, it's one of those things that can start conversations. And like you said, can have really good insights for, all of your content marketing and thought leadership programs.
Okay. So it's not as complicated as you might think. Like, you break it down where it seems completely doable. Can you tell me about survey-based research?
Yeah. So, when you do search, would it be helpful to understand what the process looks like, or what would be the most helpful part of that?
First, tell me or tell the audience what survey-based research is, and then tell us the process, how we can do it ourselves.
Yeah. So survey-based research is figuring out what are those questions that my audience has that I can help them answer with survey data. So for instance, there's a lot of other types of data out there that you might want to collect, like behavioral data or user data. But survey data is really great about understanding what people's attitudes are, things that they're planning to do, what they feel about certain things, and so forth. So it's essentially going out and it's either surveying your audience via your lists and your emails and your communities, or it's partnering with another organization to collaborate, and you guys can survey both of your lists, or it's reaching out using panel companies, so buying survey responses to understand what the general population and or a very specific part of the population thinks about something.
Yes, I just took Aaron Balsa's research class. And that's something that I just learned, is that even SurveyMonkey, you could get 1,000 survey respondents from that, and you can get really narrow in who your audience is. Like, I was looking at the different ways to filter out what type of person can fill out your survey, and you can narrow it down to pretty close to your exact audience that you serve, which is nice. But
yes.
Looking at that, do you think that it's more beneficial to go that route, or to partner with someone and survey both of your audiences? What gives you the biggest impact?
So I personally, and I know, different people like to do different things. I'm a very big fan if you have an engaged list or you can partner with someone who has an engaged list. I really like surveying your own audience, specifically if your audience is a B2B person. So if it's someone who is like I'm working with a client now and they have a bunch of RPA developers, it's a very specific audience. Or I just finished a survey with CMX, a bunch of these community managers and professionals, or a lot of marketers want to do surveys. So I think if you're going after a niche audience, even if it's niche as in marketers or, something like that, I really like going after your own list, because oftentimes people want to ask specific questions that their own audience can better answer. Yeah. So even though there is some bias to that, and there's certain types of questions you don't want to ask if you're going after your own list, but in general, I personally think that your audience is going to spend more time thoughtfully answering questions if you're taking a B2B survey. Mm-hmm. But okay. I think for a consumer-based survey, I think panels work really, really well.
Okay, that's good to know. And what would be the minimum audience size that would make sense for a survey?
So if you're doing a consumer-based study, I always say to aim for at least 1,000 people, more if you can do more. If you're doing a B2B study, I think that the bare minimum, aim for 250. Okay. And truthfully, that's not based on anything besides, I feel like the market thinks 250 is a credible source to have. Yeah. I've asked this question on LinkedIn. I'm like, what do you think is enough to have? And I think the other thing you want to be thoughtful about is, do you want to look at your data by different segments? So do you want to look at your data based on how do different company sizes vary, or how does how does successful from less successful people vary? So you need to have enough people in each segment so you can meaningfully compare them. So it's not just the number, but it's the number that you need in each segment. But a good rule of thumb is 250 for B2B, 1,000 for B2C.
Okay. I love a rule of thumb. It helps me. I'm a very square person. All right, 250. I'm a B2B person. So when we're coming up with our survey questions, do you have any guidance for that? The best way to come up with survey questions that will guide you?
So I always like to step back and think about, what is the big topic that you want to cover? So for instance, let's say you are in the video marketing space. Chances are, if you type in the state of video marketing, or even the state of B2B video marketing, you're going to see all of these different studies out there. So what you want to do is you want to find something that's a really specific niche for you to study, and really try to figure out what are those questions that your audience have that are unanswered, and what are those questions that they have that align with what you do as a company. And I think that can be really useful to look at the topic in that way, because if you find something that aligns with your brand that hasn't been covered and that's meaningful to your audience, that's a really good topic.
Do you have any ways to find that question that hasn't been asked yet?
I know Erin mentioned this to me recently, Erin Balsa, who you mentioned. They use gong calls. Like, I haven't used gong in my businesses, but like if there's any way that you can mine customer questions that you have, I always ask my clients, like, what questions do they get a lot? Or if they have an SEO team, what type of searches what are they trying to rank for? Are there questions related to that? So typically clients have a sense of, if only we knew, or if only we had, we really believe this, if only we had the data to show XYZ, that's typically a really good place to start.
Okay. Yeah, that's where I start when I'm doing my content planning, is mining for questions. What's customer service getting asked? What are your sales teams getting asked? And so that's good to know that that's where you start with the research too.
Yeah, definitely keep a list of those questions, because I think they will definitely lead to ideas. And you might not ask that question, but that'll give you a jumping off place to figure out which questions to ask.
Mm-hmm. So if someone were to want to replicate what you do for their company and create their own survey, is there any certain way they should be writing the questions to avoid bias?
So the first thing, I think that when you think about survey questions, you need to ask a question that's going to tell us a story. Because I've talked to so many marketers who do these surveys, and they say, they get back all this data, and it's what I call inventory data. It's like the state of the state. It's like, oh, people are spending more, people are doing X, Y, Z, but there's nothing interesting in it. Mm-hmm. So you need to start with figuring out, how can I tell a story with my survey questions? So for instance, I work with one of my clients, and they asked, do you plan to invest more in your writing in the next 12 months? Which is interesting. But then they asked, do you plan to invest more in your writing in the next 12 months? So obviously you found a lot of people wanted to do more, but they didn't want to spend more. Yeah. So trying to figure out, so that it was much more interesting to look at those two questions together than it was to look at just the one. But I always tell people to look for gaps. I like to ask question like what is important to you versus how satisfied are you in something, because you can see gaps. Ask questions to look for opportunities. So first, I always start by trying to figure out which questions to ask. And then from there, I then go back to refine them, to take away bias, to take away making sure questions aren't leading, making sure there's enough answer options for everyone to answer. So there's a lot of different ways to do surveys, but I always look at the story of the question first, and then I refine them.
Okay, that helps a lot. So you start with the story. What story is it that you're trying to tell? And then you ask the questions based off of that.
Yes.
And then you remove any bias from it. Because, when you have this story in your mind that you think that you'll learn from the survey, it's a lot easier for you to end up writing these questions that will lead to the answer that you want.
Yes. And I'm a very, very, very big believer of don't use your survey, your research to prove something that you believe to be true. Like, oh my gosh, look, the world needs another marketing automation tool. Really try to understand. Yeah. And it's very obvious, and people can see right through it. It just feels yucky. But really truly say, what am I curious about that's going to help my audience? And the data is going to be what the data is going to be, and accept that and tell a story behind it. Like, hey, this really surprised us. But to your point, you do have to then take a really thorough look at your questions and bring in editors and people who have a really sharp mind, so they can say, this word can mean different things. So for instance, I always tell a story about my daughter who was in third grade, and she said to me one day she had to answer this survey at school. Mm-hmm. And she said, Mom, I was asked, how often do I participate in class? And she had to say always, often, sometimes, rarely, never kind of thing. And I said, oh, what did you say? And she said, I said sometimes, because she said, my teacher has to call on everybody. So even though I'm raising my hand, she can't call on me. Whereas I took it to mean, how often am I actually paying attention, raising my hand, and so forth. So even those simple little words, you have to find someone who can help you spot those, so that the data you get back is actually meaningful.
Well, yeah, that makes sense. And that survey would be really confusing for a kid.
Yes. And it's a weird question to ask any third grader, but
yeah, I'm like the most literal person ever. And that's exactly how I would take it. I'm like, she doesn't always call on me, so I'm not always participating. Even
Yes,
though
but it
my
makes
hand is
like
always
he's not
up.
paying attention.
I think that she and I might be the same person. That's exactly how I would have interpreted it too. So, going back to the research report, how do you launch one?
So what I always do, so I like at the beginning of the process, I always think about, here are these big picture questions I want to ask or answer based on the topic. And so you create your survey based on these big picture questions. And then when you have all of the data back, I always like to say, okay, how does the data actually answer all of these big picture questions that we wanted to answer? And chances are those are going to be the key stories that you're going to want to tell in your research report and all of your other assets.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's very helpful to determine like what is the storyline throughout all of your research, or what are those big stories, and tell that story in your research report, but keep a running list of all of these other ideas that you have. Like, as you go through the data, you're going to find all of these other stories you want to tell. But I always recommend don't try to jam all of those into one report, but instead figure out like what is that through line story you can tell that in your report, and then save all of that other stuff as ideas for ways you can reimagine and amplify your research.
Yes, we were talking about this earlier in email, that there's a million ways to repurpose a research report. And actually, I had a client call this morning where they just did a research report. And I'm like, let me get my hands on that, because this is what I do is I read research reports and I figure out how to 15x it by creating different pieces of content from it. I just did this with another client, and then one today I was like, I need that report, please.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, people don't think about how you can use that. You don't have to just do that research report. You can do super micro edutainment type content pieces. You could do a TikTok with the information that you learned in your research report. There's 1,000 ways to be able to use it.
There is. And I think too, there's typically, even if you just look at the report, maybe your client has some additional data they can share too. Mm-hmm. And there's all these stories in the data that hasn't even been published. So I think research, you kind of get that 1-2 punch of repurposing what you have and then reimagining, even broader based on all this other data that you likely have.
Yeah, that survey gave you more than that storyline that you pulled into the report. You can use that. I mean, it's probably could last a year at least if the information doesn't expire, the amount of content that you could create from it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I actually wrote a blog post a long time ago. It was called How to Create a Year's Worth of Content from one research survey.
There you go. And I do not doubt that, because whenever I get my hands on one, I'm like, oh, this is gold. There's so much I can do with this.
And the beautiful thing is all those stories are actually connected. It's not like all this like just disconnected content a company throws out. It like all comes back to the bigger picture.
Thank you. I'm obsessed with episodic content, creating little cliffhangers that move you on to the next piece. So people are binging your marketing like it's Netflix, because they're like, well, shit, I need to know what the next thing is. Click next one.
I love that.
To do that with these reports.
I love that.
Yeah. It just extends into everything. Okay. So we talked a little about amplification. Is there anything that we missed in that conversation? Any other ways that they can amplify their spend on that research report?
I mean, I think that, like you said, like that could be a podcast in and of itself of what you can do, because there's so many different ideas, from like the big content like webinars to blog posts to, the micro content. One of the things I like doing that I don't see people doing a ton, just throwing out one idea, is I love using research as a way to start conversations. And I'm a fan of LinkedIn, but it could be on any platform that you want. But like share a stat or share a story and ask people, hey, this is what we found. What do you think?
That is a good point. Business development.
Exactly. And I think if I call these Oxford comma questions, but what kind of questions can you ask where people have a really strong and easy opinion about? And you could like ask that question, share that data. Everyone likes to say if they are pro or against the Oxford comma. And then like say, hey, this is what our research found. What do you guys think? Or we did this research piece about thought leadership, and we said, the question was something about, should thought leadership content be ghostwritten? And it was like half said yes, half said no. And we had such interesting conversations that spurred more, LinkedIn posts and more conversations. And a lot of people just reached out to say, hey, this is actually really useful. I'm so glad we're talking about these things. So think about just those little thought starters. I think that's a really cool way to amplify research too.
I love that. I love that idea. And that just made me think about sales enablement. You can take this information that you learned and help your sales team by giving them prompts in conversations that they can have. So it doesn't have to just be you, the marketer, the researcher that's prompting these conversations. You can hand them over to the sales team and give them an opportunity to build those relationships since they're the ones closing the sale.
Exactly. And I would also think I haven't done this a lot, but another person I know, she worked for Salesforce, Heike Young. This was years ago. She told me this, but they always put together like cheat sheets for their sales reps about the research. Like, here's what it is. And here's the talking points, here's what you find, all the things. So don't forget to take that relatively easy step just to get your research in the hands of the right people and get it out even more.
That makes sense. This topic gets me so stupidly excited.
I love that. It's really fun. It's like a right brain, left brain problem. And it's not just writing content, which burns me out, to be honest, but it's like you got to like figure things out.
Oh my gosh. I'm a right brain, left brain kind of person too, where I love a good formula. I love structure and I love reports and studies, but I am super like on that creative side where I like to find unusual ways to be able to share that content in different ways and surprise people.
Yeah.
And you can do that with that. Yeah.
And I honestly think we even haven't cracked the surface of everything that's possible. I'm always trying to learn and, study and do different things because I feel like there's so much unlimited potential here.
There is. There really is. Is there anything that I missed that I should have asked you that I didn't ask? Anything that you want to share before we wrap up?
The only thing I would say, because I get this question a lot too, if you're new to research, I think it's very, very doable to do it on your own. But I also think there's it's easy to make mistakes or just there's easy to miss steps just simply because you haven't done it. Mm-hmm. So people always say, where should I get help? And I always say, get help with writing the actual survey questions. Because if you get that part wrong, if you don't have any stories that come out of it, it really limits the potential of the research. So that's the one place I would definitely spend time.
Like people can hire you to do that, right? Review their survey questions and their...
I not specifically, and that's something I'm actually trying to figure out in the next several months. So who knows, even by the time this is published, that's something I am working on because I think that's the most important part of the process. And I'm actually putting together a pilot course on how to create a really great survey. So I didn't say that to be at all pitchy or promotional, but I just truly think like that's the part of the process. But I think if you get that part wrong, it's like, wah, wah, it's a big bummer.
Yeah.
For a lot of time spent.
Yeah. For the record, you did not mention that in this conversation, but I remember us emailing a while back and you had mentioned that you consult sometimes.
Yes. And I'm working on something more formal to really help people with that part because I think it's so important.
Okay. Well, awesome. Can you tell people how they can find you online and work with you?
Yeah. So you can find me online or my website's mantisresearch.com. I love LinkedIn. I try to be consistent. I'm not always, but you can find me on LinkedIn at Michele Linn. And I'm also just started, as Sarah knows, I also just launched a monthly meetup where we all get together, we talk about original research, share ideas. It's a new collaboration with Erin Balsa and myself, who wrote the research course that you mentioned. Mm-hmm. So if anybody wants to join, completely free, 30 minutes, the third Wednesday of every month, you can sign up on my website or reach out to me for more info.
Yes. Oh, and I'll be speaking at the April Power Hour. Power Half Hour.
I'm super excited about this.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun, which makes me realize that this should go out before that to promote that. So you're bumping up in the to April.
You'll be on April 20th, I think.
Yes. I think that's what we nailed down. I'm excited for it.
I am too.
So just to reiterate, Michele conducts survey-based research mainly for marketing. And she's available to be able to work with you. So go to mantisresearch.com, to be able to reach her. And her information will be right here in the description. And she also has an amazing newsletter, which I signed up for ages ago. And that is at mantisresearch.com/subscribe. She also hosts a research power half hour with Erin Balsa, also another research genius. So you won't want to miss out on that either. Make sure to sign up for her research half hour. And this month, April, I will actually be one of their guest speakers for that. It's seriously, if you're interested in creating thought leadership content, you don't want to miss out on original research and how that can really drive your marketing. So just to reiterate, Michele is the go-to person for original research. And if you're interested in repurposing the report that you get at the end of that research, that's where I come in. Tiny Marketing often gets research reports, and I'll dive into it, develop a big old content marketing plan to go with it, and make that content marketing plan come to life. So I'm a repurposing queen. If you end up going through that, doing the original research, and getting that report, make sure to repurpose it because you can 10x that report easily. You don't want to miss out on the power that you get through original research with PR, media mentions, influencers. There's so much more reach that you get with that original research. So I'm excited to have gotten the opportunity to share that with you. So both Michele and I love LinkedIn. So make sure to find us over there and hit us up. Chat away. We would love to connect with you. Okay, guys. Is Michele not a genius? Talking to her makes me feel like original research is completely doable. Now, in my mind, it feels, daunting and out of my abilities. But when I talk to Michele, I realize just how easy it is, even for small marketing departments. All you really need is access to SurveyMonkey. You can purchase your audience through there. You can create your surveys through there, and it'll aggregate the data for you. It can be that simple. Now, Michele goes so much further than that. So if you want real original research and a full report and all of that, please, please, please go visit Mantis Research and look for Michele Linn. She's amazing on LinkedIn. If you're not following her, follow her. Thank you so much for joining me. And don't forget to hit subscribe, rate, make sure people see this podcast in their feeds and they listen to my little voice. Thank you. Hello, and thank you for joining Tiny Marketing. I help tiny marketing departments create consistent content that builds trust with their audience. Book Done For You Content Marketing at sarahnoelblock.com. Don't forget to follow, rate, and review the podcast on your favorite podcast app. See you next time, friends.